Hello and welcome back to As an Aggregator, a channel designed around connecting content consumers to content one title and thumbnail at a time. Now here at As an Aggregator, we curate content for you in terms of giving you an out to escape your filter bubble. Now if you feel sandboxed by your YouTube algorithm, this is your chance to escape. Check out the playlists that we curate here on this channel or on our playlist archive channel by searching for quick pick playlists. Now we're jumping back into part 2 of chapter 1, Science and Technique. Let's continue.
Moreover, scientific advance, and sets off techniques advanced with great rapidity, demands a corresponding. As Charles Carmichael has observed, the two are closer than ever before. The very fact that techniques advance with great rapidity demands a corresponding scientific advance and sets off a general acceleration. Moreover, techniques are always put to immediate use. The interval which traditionally separates a scientific discovery and its application in everyday life has been progressively shortened. As soon as a discovery is made, a concrete application is facilitated. Moreover, techniques are always put to immediate use. The interval which traditionally separates a scientific discovery and its application in everyday life has been progressively shortened. As soon as a discovery is made, a concrete application is sought. Capital becomes interested, or the state, and the discovery enters the public domain before anyone has had the chance to reckon all the consequences or to recognize its full import. The scientist might act more prudently. He might even be afraid to launch his carefully calculated laboratory findings into the world. But how can he resist the pressure of the facts? How can he resist the pressure of money? How is he to resist success, publicity, public acclaim, or the general state of mind which makes technical application the last word? How is he to resist the desire to pursue his research? Such is the dilemma of the researcher today. Either he allows his findings to be technologically applied, or he is forced to break off his research.
That's an interesting consideration. To what extent do you think that this conceptualization is still valid in our present moment, in terms of patents and the general concept of what he's speaking about in terms of this gradient between hypothesis, technique, technology, and theory?
The drama of the atomic physicists who saw that only the laboratories at Los Alamos could provide them with the technical instruments necessary to the continuation of their work. The state, then, exercises a very real monopoly, and the scientist is obliged to accept its conditions. As one of the atomic scientists put it, "What keeps me here is the possibility of using for my work a special microscope which exists nowhere else." Jung. The scientist is no longer able to hold out. Even science, especially the magnificent science of our own day, has become an element of technique, a mere means. There we have, indeed, the final word. Science has become an instrument of technique. Later, we shall consider how it has come about that scientific utilitarianism has gained such momentum from technique that a disinterested piece of research is no longer possible. It has always been necessary to have a scientific substructure, but today it is scarcely possible to effect a separation between scientific and technical research. Indeed, our omnivorous technique, and this represents in part Einstein's thought, may in the end make science sterile. I shall often use the term technique in place of the more commonly used term science, and designate as techniques work that is usually termed scientific. This is due to the close association of technique and science, which I have pointed out, and which I shall discuss more fully
Okay, interesting.
later
Technique
on.
and science, science and technique.
Organization and technique. A third element will help us formulate our problem more clearly. I have already pointed out that we must understand the term technique in a broader sense. But some authors, not wishing to deviate from traditional linguistic usage, prefer to keep to its current meaning and seek another term to designate the phenomena we are describing here. According to Arnold Toynbee, history is divided into three periods, and it is on the point of passing from the technical period into the period of organization. I agree with Toynbee that mechanical technique no longer characterizes our times. However important and impressive mechanical technique remains, it is only accessory to other factors which are much more decisive, if less spectacular. I have in mind the vast amount of organization in every field, the recognition of which led James Burnham to write The Managerial Revolution. But I cannot agree with Toynbee in his choice of terms or in the line he draws between the technical period and the period of organization. In his sketchy conception of technique, for which he has been severely criticized, the confusion between machine and technique remains. He has limited the realm of technique to what it was in the past, without considering what it is now. In reality, what Toynbee calls organization and Burnham calls managerial action is technique applied to social, economic, or administrative life. What but technique is the organization defined in the following? Organization is the process which consists in assigning appropriate tasks to individuals or to groups so as to attain, in an efficient and economic way, and by the coordination and combination of all their activities, the objectives agreed upon. For groups is the organization defined in the following. Organization is the process which consists in assigning appropriate tasks to individuals or to groups so as to attain, in an efficient and economic way, and by the coordination and combination of all their activities, the objectives agreed upon. Sheldon. This leads to the standardization and the rationalization of economic and administrative life, as Antoine Masse has well shown. Standardization means resolving in advance all the problems that might possibly impede the functioning of an organization. It is not a matter of leaving it to inspiration, ingenuity, nor even intelligence to find a solution at the moment some difficulty arises. It is rather in some way to anticipate both the difficulty and its resolution. From then on, standardization creates impersonality, in the sense that organization relies more on methods and instructions than on individuals. We thus have all the marks of a technique. Organization is a technique, and André L. Vincent had good reason to write, "To approach the optimum combination of factors, or the optimum dimension, is to accomplish technical progress in the form of a better organization." It will no doubt be asked, what is the point of discussing these terms, since at bottom you are in agreement with Toynbee? But these discussions are important. Toynbee separates centuries and phenomena which ought to remain united. He would have us believe that organization is something other than technique, that man has in a way discovered a new field of action and new methods, and that we must study organization as a new phenomenon, when it is nothing of the sort. I, on the other hand, insist on the continuity of the technical process. It is this process which is taking on a new aspect. I would say its true aspect, and is developing on a worldwide scale. What are the consequences? The first is that the problems created by mechanical technique will be heightened to a degree as yet incalculable as a result of the application of technique to administration and to all spheres of life. Toynbee believes that this organization, which is succeeding technique, is in some way a counterbalance to it, and a remedy, and that is a comforting view of history. But it seems to me that the exact opposite is true.
Okay, let's re-rack this.
That this application of technique to administration be acting on a worldwide scale. What are the consequences? The first is that the problems created by mechanical technique will be heightened to a degree as yet incalculable as a result of the application of technique to administration and to all spheres of life. Toynbee believes that this augmented to a degree as yet. The first is that the problems created by mechanical technique will be heightened to a degree as the first is that the problems created by mechanical technique will be heightened to a degree as yet incalculable as a result of the application of technique to administration and to all spheres of life. Toynbee believes that this organization, which is succeeding technique, is in some way a counterbalance to it, and a remedy, and that is a comforting view of history. But it seems to me that the exact opposite is true. That this development adds to the technical problems by offering a partial solution to old problems, itself based on the very methods that created the problems in the first place. This is the age-old procedure of digging a new hole to fill up an old one. A second consequence. If what we are witnessing is only an extension of the domain of technique, what was said above about mechanization is understandable. Toynbee writes, consequence. If what we to fill up an old one. A second consequence. If what we are witnessing is only an extension of the domain of technique, what was said above about mechanization is understandable. Toynbee writes of organization as a phenomenon whose effects cannot yet be seen. However, we can be confident that the final result will be that technique will assimilate everything to the machine. The ideal for which technique strives is the mechanization of everything it encounters. It is clear, therefore, that my opposition to Toynbee, even if it appears to be merely verbal, is significant. The technical age continues to advance, and we cannot even say that we are at the peak of its expansion. In fact, some decisive conquests remain to be made, man among others, and it is hard to see what is to prevent technique from making them. Thus, even if this is not a question of a new factor, it is at least clear now what the phenomenon involves and what it signifies. Definitions. Once we stop identifying technique and machine, the definitions of technique we find are inadequate to the established facts. Marcel Mauss, the sociologist, understands the problem admirably and has given various definitions of technique, some of which are excellent. Let us take one that is open to criticism and, by criticizing it, state our ideas more precisely. Technique is a group of movements, of actions generally and mostly manual, organized and traditional, all of which unite to reach a known end.
Let's hear that
For
again.
example, physical, chemical, or organic. And more precisely, that is open to criticism. Technique is a group of movement. State our ideas more precisely. Technique is a group of movements, of actions generally and mostly manual, organized and traditional movements. State our ideas more precisely. Technique is a group of movements, of actions generally and mostly manual, organized and traditional, all of which unite to reach a known end. For example, physical, chemical, or organic. This definition is perfectly valid for the sociologist who deals with the primitive. It offers, as Mauss shows, numerous advantages. For example, it eliminates from the realm of techniques questions of religion or art. Magic, however, ought to be classified among techniques, as we shall see later. But these advantages apply only in a historical perspective. In the modern perspective, this definition is insufficient. Can it be said that the technique of elaboration of an economic plan, purely a technical operation, is the result of such movements as Mauss describes? No particular motion or physical act is involved. An economic plan is purely an intellectual operation, which nevertheless is a technique. When we consider Mauss's statement of such movements as Mauss describes, magic, however, ought to be classified among techniques, as we shall see later. But these advantages apply only in a historical perspective. In the modern perspective, this definition is insufficient. Can it be said that the technique of elaboration of an economic plan, purely a technical operation, is the result of such movements as Mauss describes? No particular motion or physical act is involved. An economic plan is purely an intellectual operation, which nevertheless is a technique. When we consider Mauss's statement that technique is restricted to manual activity, the inadequacy of his definition is even more apparent. Today, most technical operations are not manual. Whether machines are substituted for men or technique becomes intellectual, the most important sphere in the world today, because in it lie the seeds of future development, is scarcely that of manual labor. True, manual labor is still the basis of mechanical operation, and we would do well to recall Junger's principal argument against the illusion of technical progress. He holds that the more technique is perfected, the more it requires secondary manual labor. And furthermore, that the volume of manual operations increases faster than the volume of mechanical operations. This may be so, but the most important feature of techniques today is that they do not depend on manual labor, but on organization and on the arrangement of machines. I am willing to accept the term organized as Mauss uses it in his definition, but I must part company with him in respect to his use of the term traditional. And this differentiates the technique of today from that of previous civilizations. It is true that in all civilizations technique has existed as tradition, that is, by the transmission of inherited processes that slowly ripen and are even more slowly modified, that evolve under the pressure of circumstances along with the body's social, that create automatisms which become hereditary and are integrated into each new form of technique. But how can anyone fail to see that none of this holds true today? Technique has become autonomous. It has fashioned an omnivorous world which obeys its own laws and which has renounced all tradition. Technique no longer rests on tradition, but rather on previous technical procedures, and its evolution is too rapid, too upsetting to integrate the older traditions. This fact, which we shall study at some length later on, also explains why it is not quite true that a technique assures a result known in advance. It is true if one considers only the user. The driver of an automobile knows that he can expect to go faster when he steps on the accelerator. But even in the field of the mechanical, with the advent of the technique of servo mechanisms, this axiom does not hold true. Footnote: mechanisms which involve so-called feedback, in which information measuring the degree to which an effector, that is, an oil furnace, is in error with respect to producing a desired value, that is, a fixed room temperature, is fed back to the effector by a monitor, that is, a thermostat. In these cases, the machine itself adapts as it operates. This very fact makes it difficult to predict the final result of its activity. This becomes clear when one considers not use but technical progress, although at the present time the two are closely associated. It is less and less exact to maintain that the user remains for very long in possession of a technique, the results of which he can predict. Constant invention ceaselessly upsets his habits. Finally, Mauss appears to think that the goal attained is of a chemical or a physical order. But today we recognize that techniques go further. Psychoanalysis and sociology have passed into the sphere of technical application. One example of this is propaganda. Here the operation is of a moral, psychic, and spiritual character. However, that does not prevent it from being a technique. But what we are talking about is a world once given over to the pragmatic approach, and now being taken over by method. We can say, therefore, that Mauss's definition, which was valid for technique until the 18th century, is not applicable to our times. In this respect, Mauss has been the victim of his own sociological studies of primitive people, as his classification of techniques, food gathering, the making of garments, transport, etc., clearly shows. Further examples of inadequate definition are those supplied by Jean Forestier and others who pursue the same lines of research as he. For Forestier, technical progress is the growth of the volume of production obtained through a fixed quantity of raw material or human labor. That is, technique is uniquely that which promotes this increase in yield. He then goes on to say that it is...
Okay, let's pause to see if... So, what did we learn over the past 10 minutes? Okay, we're dipping into technique. Here we go. Okay, organization and technique. A third element, he's saying we must understand the term technique in a broader sense. Now, Arnold Toynbee, a specific person, let's highlight this. Arnold Toynbee, history is divided into 3 periods. It is the point of passing from the technical period into the period of organization. Okay, so now Jacques Ellul is making this consideration in the context of a third element, where he's linking the concept of technique in a broader sense, specifically in terms of how people are talking about how technique relates to a wider context. So he's saying, hey, There was a point Arnold Toynbee is talking about history being divided into different periods, saying that it's a point from passing the technical period into the period of organization. So he's saying, hey, there was a technical period, and now it seems like it's more organization. And the author is saying that they agree with Toynbee that mechanical techniques no longer characterizes our time. So it's not solely it's not just what it means to deal with, hey, are we working on a conveyor belt, on a conveyor line? This isn't the mad dash to industrialization 1.0. This is an industrialization 3.0, 4.0, where in the wake of artificial intelligence and compute costs coming down and our energy subsidy being diminished simultaneously, while we're subsidizing our ability to access the internet and access different forms of compute and compressed information domains, those aspects of pure play mechanical techniques isn't really as characteristic to our times when it comes to saying, hey, what does it mean to understand how a large language model works? And is it an expectation as a part of our society that everyone will have what in just the past few years might have been a associate's degree or even a bachelor's degree in prompt engineering, saying and specifying in a future context, will that be the status quo as a reflection of not mechanical technique, but a nuanced aspect of an expectation in relation to how one navigates the world and their society and civilization as a reflection of culture. So we continue. The author writes, I have in mind the vast amount of organization in every field, the recognition of which led James Burton to write The Managerial Revolution. So now we're still talking about technique and organization, technical period of organization, confusion between machine and technique. So they're limiting techniques still. Now he brings up Toynbee talking about organization and Burnham calling managerial action. And okay, so but what technique is the organization defined in the following? Okay, so it says, quote, organization is the process which consists in assigning appropriate tasks to individuals or to groups so as to attain in an efficient and economic way, and by the coordination and combination of all their activities, the objectives agreed upon. Continuing, they're saying, that was Sheldon. Continuing, this leads to the standardization and the rationalization of the economic and administrative life. So we're continuing. Standardization creates impersonality. Okay, organization is a technique. That's an important point. And then they say, okay, but they wrote this in quotes. They said, hey, to approach the optimum combination of factors or the optimum dimension is ... to accomplish technical progress in the form of a better organization. Okay, so to approach the optimum combination of factors or the optimum dimension is to accomplish technical progress in the form of better organization. So as they continue, Toynbee separates centuries and phenomenon which ought to remain united. He would leave us to believe that organization is something other than technique. So what is organization and what is technique? That's what's being differentiated and highlighted so that we as readers can make a clear distinction between technique and organization. Continuity of the technical process. It is the process in which taking on a new aspect, developing worldwide skills, problems created by mechanical technique will be heightened to a degree. Toynbee believes that this organization, which is succeeding technique, is in some way a counterbalance to it, and saying, hey, no, it's actually the opposite. And it's saying, hey, the age-old process of digging a new hole to fill up the old one, because he's just replacing the same thing by not being able to differentiate organization from technique. He's saying, no. It's actually when you're referring to organization, you're actually referring to another aspect of technique itself. And he's pointing out, he's saying, oh, it's tricky when our scholars are deploying these thoughts, and it's leading us in a direction where we don't have a clear analysis of technique itself because we're conflating these ideas, or at least that's what I'm getting in terms of him saying, hey, we have to differentiate organization from technique. Otherwise, we will not be able to properly characterize technique itself. And then he's saying, okay, there's a second consequence. If what we are witnessing is only an extension of the domain of technique, what was said above about the mechanization is understandable. Toynbee writes of organization as a phenomenon whose effects cannot yet be seen. However, we will be confident that the final result will be that technique will assimilate everything to the machine. Okay. So they're saying if what we were witnessing is only an extension, okay, so maybe it's just an extension. It's just reaching out, and technique is absorbing organization. Then what was said above about mechanization is understandable, and then saying that Toynbee writes of organization as a phenomenon whose effects cannot yet be seen. Oh, so what will be the result of organization? ... Then continuing, however, we can be confident that the final result will be that technique will assimilate everything to the machine. The ideal for which technique strives is the mechanization of everything it encounters. It is clear, therefore, that my opposition to Toynbee, even if it appears to be merely verbal, is significant. The technical age continues to advance, and we cannot even say that we are at the peak of its expansion. In fact, some divisive conquests remain to be made. Man among others, and it's hard to see what it is to prevent technique from making them. So these decisive conquests, right? Thus, even if it is not a question of a new factor, it is at least clear now what the phenomenon involves and what it signifies. And then we move into definitions. So actually, I'm going to pause right here and leave us off, and when we jump back in, we're going to jump back into the section on definitions. If you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, establish conscious competence over the content you consume today by adding videos you watch into a playlist right now. I repeat, if you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, establish conscious competence over the content you consume today by adding videos you watch into a playlist right now. Add videos you watch into a playlist right now to begin your journey of establishing conscious competence over the content you consume. This has been a part of Chapter 1. I believe this is Part 4, 4B, I think. We'll have to work on our naming schema. This has been As an Aggregator.